Hello. Yeah, it's working. Good evening, everybody. Welcome in the Rode Hoed at the 6th October lecture of Raam op Rusland. It's good to see really so many of you here. It's really impressive. And I've been told that also a lot of people are watching online. So welcome to you as well. I don't know where to watch, but welcome anyways. Of course, all of you have come to listen to a very special guest this year, Illia Ponomarenko. He arrived from Kyiv yesterday, and we're very happy that he's here. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Before we start, we're going to listen to you, I have a few things to say about the order of the evening. First of all, I forgot to introduce myself. Sorry, my name is Sisha Hekster. I work for NOS, public broadcaster based in Brussels right now. But I was a previous Moscow correspondent also and traveled from time to time during this year to Ukraine. Also meeting some of your colleagues at Kyiv Independent.
But not me.
Yes, Illia, I'm sure you're all aware that he is, after President Zelensky, the most popular.
That was a joke.
That was a joke?
That was a joke, a running joke in my newsroom that comes from some fringe pro-Kremlin website that says that this enabler of Ukrainian Nazis, supported by NATO, is the guy who is second popular on Twitter after President Zelensky. This statement was so bold and absurd that it made a running joke at the Kyiv Independent, and some media outlets in Ukraine that had interviews with me, they caught up on this for some reason. So ever since then, everybody called me this way, which is not.
But anyways, there's no need to be modest because you have over 1 million followers on different social media. So I guess a lot of your followers are here tonight, and those of you who don't follow Illia yet, I'm sure you will after tonight. What we're going to do, we're going to first listen to you for about half an hour, then there will be short Q&A on the stage, and after that there's plenty of time for all your pressing questions. I think we have to spend maybe few words on the fact that in all those years, when there was a October lecture, never before, we were in the middle of a horrendous war, and all of us face its consequences, but nobody, of course, first and foremost, it's you and Ukrainians that are in this nightmare. So thank you so much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, seriously, thank you for having me tonight. I'm really glad that I made it to Amsterdam finally. I spent like 30 hours on the road. So I do hope that we're going to have a very intimate and very worthwhile conversation tonight. And I came here, it's a lecture in general, so I've been told. But I came here not to, lecture anyone or saying something or, condemning things. Or saying that you owe us something, things like that. I came here to talk about things like hope and good faith. I'm really glad that I made it to Amsterdam because it's my first time in the city. I'm really glad to have a sort of a semi-vacation during wartime. And it's very good to be talking to Dutch people because we Ukrainians and the Dutch people, even though we are on the opposite side of the European continent, but we have a thing in common. Once upon a time, years ago, I was a student in the city of Mariupol, and I was working at the like a cargo terminal as a usual worker. I was a student, and once upon a time, I got back from work to my university. To my dormitory room in my university, and I just popped up with my laptop to see what was in the news for the day. When I saw it, what was in the news, I said something in Russian, a phrase in Russian, "Довоевались уроды." It can be roughly translated as, "Look at what you have done with your war, you freaks." That was about the people who did the MH17 downing. That was in 2014. So I was referring to these events. To me personally, and to many people in Ukraine, the MH17 in 2014 was a watershed moment because it was the first truly large, massive act of barbarity, a watershed moment that showed us that what was happening in Donbass at the time, it was not a localized, local, regional war anymore. It was something that might bring us even more barbarity that would be of no limits at all. So many of us remember this as the significant moments and horrifying moments, one of the worst things that happened at that time. So it's been more than 8 years, obviously. I'm not a student anymore. Today I'm here with you. I'm a journalist who represents his country in Ukraine. We're still in this conflict, in this war that's going on in the same year. And over the last 8 years, and especially over the last 8 months, since late February, I have seen a lot of truly unbelievable things. Truly unbelievable things have happened to us. The city of my student years, Mariupol, have been turned into ruins, lifeless ruins. My hometown of Volnovakha also razed to the ground. It does not exist anymore, basically, as a human settlement. It just can't support human life anymore because of Russian attacks and Russian bombardment. And MH17 criminals have not been brought to justice still up to this day. I've seen unbelievable things as a journalist and also as a Ukrainian living in Kyiv. I've seen Russian jets roaring underneath my house in Kyiv. I've seen my city, Kyiv, the heart of the whole nation, being just 2 steps away from downfall before advancing Russian armies. It was scary. I've seen, we have a 72nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade, part of the Ukrainian military. During my work with the Kyiv Post, I've spent many days with these combat formations of this 72nd Brigade. I had many stories with them. And during the Battle of Kyiv, the soldiers of the same brigade, 72nd Mechanized Brigade, they were defending Kyiv until the last breath. I saw basically my brigade in a new war just dying to save Kyiv until the last stand during the Battle of Moshchun. Moshchun was basically a small settlement just at the gates of Kyiv in the northwest of Kyiv, and that was the key to Kyiv. And my brigade, my soldiers of my brigade, many of my friends, they were just dying till the last drop, not to let Russians in, and to save the national capital from absolute downfall, despite absolutely insane blood. So we were in late February, during the first 5 days of the war, we were absolutely insanely close to the downfall. We were understanding that if Russians make it in terms of Kyiv, for instance, that would be the end of the world. That would be the end of many things that are precious and valued to my generation, to generation of Euromaidan revolutions, the democratic reforms, attempts to have some economic rise, visa-free regime with the European nations, a resurrection of Ukrainian culture, modern Ukrainian culture. So we loved it. We were at the very immediate risk of losing everything we wanted, everything we loved, and everything we worked for as a journalist, as usual people, as activists. So we were very close to the downfall. So there have been unbelievable things over these 8 months, but to me the most unbelievable and stunning thing was the fact that despite this doom and gloom, Ukraine managed to defeat the early Russian blitzkrieg and to reverse the tide of the war. Right now we're not talking about whether Kyiv will fall within 72 hours. We're not talking about if Ukraine survives as a nation. Right now we're talking about if we can retake Kherson within the next 6 weeks or even less. why are we here where we are against all the expectations. A while ago, our guys at the Kyiv Independent, our media outlet, they suggested that I write a book about what has happened over these 8 months and try to give an answer to why does this happen. And I was thinking, I really liked this idea. I decided to write a book because I had a lot of things to say, especially when it comes to the Battle of Kyiv, which I witnessed. And I was thinking about what was the conclusion behind what we have seen, the most essential thing. Of course, there have been lots of conclusions militarily, diplomatically, politically, but I wasn't satisfied about this. I wanted to have something that gives you the most ultimate lesson behind this war, the most essential thing. And I made it that the most essential thing behind what happened following late February was the moral aspect of it. This war has taught me one simple thing, is that in the darkest moment, you should act according to one's best consciousness, best intentions, and best faith. No matter how hard it is, no matter how deadly it is, doing the right thing, no matter what, is always the right way to go. Of course, it's a very basic moral principle. I'm not inventing anything. It's known to everyone. But in the mayhem of war, of catastrophic war, in which millions of people lose their lives, and in which the world for many people is just falling down from the sky, this moral principle and this plan is something else. It gets enormous meaning, far more wide than we normally presume it in our lives. So I understood that seemingly easy way was always wrong. Of course, that's true for our everyday life, but it's also true for politics and for war too. And in complicated situations, when the fate of nations is at stake, many people at many levels have to make a moral choice of going the hard way, which is probably will be correct but hard, and going the easiest way, which would be wrong. So in this hard situation that we faced on that morning, the Ukrainian nation had to make this choice, and it made it, and its people did made it. And I made it too, because on the invasion night, the night before the invasion, basically when this whole thing started, I made my mother leave Donbass on the train. She took the last train from Donbass, and she got back. So I literally forced her into doing so. She arrived on the invasion day amid this mayhem in Kyiv, amid this tight atmosphere of doomsday. And I understood that I have to bring her to a safe place. My flatmate, his name is Ivan, and he has a car, so we decided that we use his car, and we try to evacuate her to a safe place in western Ukraine. So we decided that we leave, and we managed to flee Kyiv despite this mayhem, the convoy of tanks, immense traffic jams, the whole city being very close to the panic. So, but nonetheless, we managed to make it to a really small town just at the border with Moldova, something like 600 kilometers away from Kyiv. And when we arrived, I was so exhausted that when I made it to the nearest sofa in the house, I was so exhausted that I just exhaled and I just got knocked out, because I haven't had sleep for like 50 hours or so. But in the morning the question came, what's next? Okay, we made it. We managed to evacuate my mother. But what about us? Two males, one being a journalist, the other being a journalist's friend with a car. So which was essential, yeah. Yeah. So I from the beginning, I felt pressed to get a plan of how to get back to Kyiv, because normal transportation wasn't working, except maybe for the military convoys, I don't know. So I started asking my friend if he wants to get back, because we gotta do something about this. So he was so scared, he was nervous, he couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, and his hands were shaking. He was saying, no, I'm not gonna get back to there, because he was shocked. But with the conversations, as emotions died down, we came to a conclusion that we need to get back, both of us, and he wanted to get back too. Because when emotions died down, we decided that we're not just giving up that easy. We are sons of this town in some way. We both moved to this town like 6 years before that. We owe very much to Kyiv. It gave us careers, a chance in life. So we decided that we have to get back. And he was scared, and I was scared too, because at that moment, it was February 25th, my birthday, and in the news, things were not looking good. Russian military advancing on Kyiv basically started encircling it, being just a couple of steps away from actually entering the city territory, while the Ukrainian military tried to hold them down at the city's borders. But in the news, meanwhile, there's a district in northern Kyiv, it's called Obolon. And in the news, you can find lots of videos on YouTube of that. The military was just giving away automatic rifles, AK Kalashnikov rifles, just in the streets. They would put boxes of rifles from trucks and box them and just give rifles away to very general people, to whoever wants to take the gun and fight, because it was a desperate step. Because the military and territorial defense, they were really afraid that Russians may break through northern Kyiv at any moment. So we saw in the news, we saw regular people in the streets, untrained civilians, getting AK rifles to fight a regular army advancing through the very streets. So they also made a choice between just giving up and trying to do something about this, probably at the expense of their own lives. So that was impressive. If you haven't seen this, I highly recommend that you find this video on the internet, because it's just mind-blowing. So we decided to get back, but secretly, I was absolutely trying to encourage my mom, my girlfriend, who was staying in Western Ukraine. I told them that I have to get back because I'm a journalist. Maybe we will get back, and for a couple of days, and we will get back. But things were looking not good, and I had a hope of at least doing my role in the Battle of Kyiv and possibly make it out alive when the city falls, So that was my hope. Maybe we'll stay alive, and maybe we'll get back to our families alive, and maybe to fight another day. It's either being a journalist or being a fighter. We'll see what the situation is. So we decided to get back, and we did make it in a very hard fashion. We made it to empty, horrible city, left by most of the residents during the missile attacks against Kyiv. So we saw Ukrainian air defenses trying to intercept Russian missiles incoming, the lights of Ukrainian counter missiles coming up in the sky unsuccessfully, and to the booms of incoming Russian missiles. But we made it, and that was the Battle of Kyiv in the very heat, the very beginning of the Battle of Kyiv. And we decided that we're not giving up and we don't care. And this was the most correct decision that I ever made in my life. So I couldn't forget myself for yet another decision. So we entered the city. We lived in an apartment that was pretty close to the battlefield, close to Irpin and Bucha, one of the centers of fighting. We used to wake up to the sound of artillery and used to go to sleep to the sound of artillery. We shared food. We survived in the city almost under siege. We had backup plans how we can escape. We worked as a team. I was working as a journalist, and he was my driver. That's why I needed his car. Yeah. I repeated that it was super essential during the Battle of Kyiv. So we were just 2 guys out of millions of people. And this principle of making a moral decision was applied not to ordinary people like myself, but also to people like Volodymyr Zelensky. For years, I've been quite critical, and I still am, of Volodymyr Zelensky. I've met him quite a few times in my life, and he always seemed to be not very serious about his job, to be honest, and rather messy about his job. But when the darkest hour came, he also made a decision, and his administration, the security service, they absolutely begged him to leave Kyiv and get evacuated. Western leaders offered their assistance in his evacuation from Kyiv, because chances were really high that Kyiv will be taken by Russians and the whole of Ukrainian leadership will be killed or imprisoned or arrested. According to a legend, that is most probably a legend, he said that I don't need a ride, I need ammo. That's a legend, I'm almost sure. But nonetheless, he did it. He did stay, and that was the only decision that was possible if we want our country to sustain. Right now, because of this decision, the country in many ways stands. And besides, Vladimir Zelensky as the prominent wartime leader, not as yet another leader in exile, giving interviews and making sad statements on Facebook. We know him as who we are thanks to this decision, and the country goes on fighting because of this decision, because the loss of Kyiv and the loss of leadership would be a devastating blow upon Ukraine. And thanks to this national unity among many people and among the leadership, we are where we are now, and there is no Russian flag in Maidan Zelensky Square, and Russians are losing ground right now in Ukraine day by day. I'm sure you see it in the news. And what's even more important about this is that Vladimir Putin is now not thinking about where he can go and what he can swallow next, thanks to these many decisions. And again, why did this happen? Before this lecture, the organizers of this event sent me like a sort of list of basic questions that might be of great interest to the audience. And one of them was, why did Russia was so wrong about Ukraine? I often call this on Twitter. I often call this one of the dumbest and most absurd wars in human history, because in all seriousness, the leadership of the world's largest country, which is Russia, they, in all seriousness, were thinking that Ukraine will simply fall into their hands without a fight, without basically a fight. They thought Ukraine was not capable of saying no. They thought they can do anything about this. And why does this happen? Because lies. Because they lied to themselves, and this lie blinded them. It consumed them. The whole system is built on the principle that you have to tell your superiors things that they wanted to hear without any connection to real things on the ground. Real things on the ground exist in their own reality. And your superiors also report to their superiors what they wanted to hear rather than what's really happening. And this vicious chain goes up to the very corridors of Kremlin. So they lied so much that they believed themselves in this lie. And they were blind, and they failed to see that Ukraine is not the same Soviet republic anymore. It's been 30 years. We have formed our own identity. Ukraine became a thing over this 30 years. We have our own national myth. We have our own identity. We have our own history. We have our own internet memes that not many people abroad understand, but still, it's a sign of unity. And there are people that love this, love what we have. And there are people that are ready to fight and die for what we have, or work with what we have, and stand for what they have, and do their thing for what they have, to simply save what they love from there. Putin did that. That Ukraine is a sign of I don't know, sort of historic mistake. It's a joke that exists only on paper, but in reality, Ukraine was a thing and is a thing. So they were blind about this. And they were so delusional about this that they thought there will be nothing to stop them, that will simply offer little to no resistance. And the overconfidence, as I am recalling those things, the Russian overconfidence was just appalling. They wanted to basically easily gain a foothold at the Hostomel airport, and then gain a foothold somewhere in downtown Kyiv, such as the Motherland Statue Square, and then break into the governmental quarter, and then get Ukrainian leadership arrested, and quickly dissolve the Ukrainian military, and facing little to no resistance. And we all remember these things from the news, that long convoys of Russian military, they were moving along roads in Ukraine almost without any protection, without any obedience to law of war that could protect them from ambushes, for instance. We remember those things like Russian Rosgvardia units basically having nothing but shields and clubs against crowds. They expected to have no more job other than crack down on protesters in Ukrainian cities. These long-run stories about Russian soldiers making reservations in Kyiv restaurants because they were so sure. And it's true. FSB officers also booking apartments for themselves in Kyiv because they were so sure about this. And what's most important is that they lied so much that they believed in their own might, overwhelming might. But what I have seen during the Battle of Kyiv and also other places, was a destitute army. It was absolutely neglectful towards its own soldiers. The situation in the maintenance of the Russian military against all expectations were lower than what we have in Ukraine. We did not expect that, absolutely did not expect that. Because the whole system is based on the lie, on eye-washing. So that's why they were blind about us and they were blind about themselves. And I'm not even talking about things like battlefield tactics. It was very primitive. It is still very primitive. Because the career promotion system is also compromised. It's also prone to corruption, to lies, to nepotism. The whole system is rotten to the core. But nonetheless, because of the Soviet legacy, this Russian military is still it's very large. It's primitive, it's poor, it's destitute, but it's large, and it has almost endless stocks of Soviet legacy. It still has millions of artillery rounds. It has thousands of tanks, no matter how many Ukrainian military has killed. And the worst thing is that the Russian military is ready to waste the manpower without basically second thought, which is why we are seeing this partial mobilization, as they call it. Back in February, Russian military entered Ukraine with 9 directions all across the country, all across the borderline, except for West Ukraine. They had only 150,000 troops, which was not enough, to be honest. Another sign of overconfidence. And in those early days of February, 8 months ago, we know it for sure that they repeatedly addressed the Ukrainian command and leadership in terms of unconditional surrender. They promised to hold all hostilities, all advances, if Ukraine just gives up unconditionally and puts up the fight. But people like General Zaluzhny, Valery Zaluzhny, the top general of the Ukrainian military, he also had a hope. So that's why he declined, he and other leaders, he declined all those calls for unconditional surrender. And he did certain things that gave us a hope and a chance. He knew that those Russian convoys that we mentioned, they have to go deeper in Ukrainian territory, so they could get lost along roads in forests and face Ukrainian ambushes. And they were so effective. I mean, Ukrainian troops were so effective at ambushing those barely protected, overconfident convoys entering Ukraine and rushing towards Chernihiv and Kyiv. The Ukrainian military, they decentralized the command and control system, in which more units on the lower level have been given more authority in terms of deciding what to do about their situation they are in. So they gave them more control over what's happening. They decentralized the whole system. And since the Ukrainian military had no chances against a large enemy in the frontal attack, so they applied to the tactic of small units, which would be very hard to detect in terms of intelligence. And they were very mobile, and they had very good capabilities in terms of destroying tanks. We're getting back to ambushes against tank convoys. You know, I've seen many occasions in which Russian convoy moves along the roads in the forests bound to Kyiv, and we have several small Ukrainian units with javelins or in laws. What Ukrainians do, they knock out fuel trucks and let tanks go further. Without fuel, tanks stop intact and ready to be taken. So, yeah, that's why Russia is the top provider of hardware for Ukraine. So these people who were doing this ambushes and who were put up the fight, I mean, soldiers, officers, they also have the hope that it's worthwhile to fight this war. As a result, we have something that we call the victory in the Battle of Kyiv by late March. There's a thing about this war, which is something that not many people in media talk about, is that by late May, early June, something happened in the Ukrainian military that we basically ran out of Soviet ammunition for artillery. No more than that. And without artillery, Ukraine would have no chance against the superior Russian force. So what the Ukrainian military had to do is to basically switch to Western-provided NATO standard calibers, artillery pieces, thousands of them, hundreds of artillery pieces and thousands of munitions. And Ukrainian military had to switch between two systems within basically weeks. I think we had nearly 10 days of extremely bloodletting gap between these two transitions, during which Ukrainian guns were silent. But after nearly 10 days, they were up again with Western guns. So those people also had a hope that we run out of ammunition, but we still can put up the fight if we use the Western weaponry, and we go on with this. So my point is that, you know, life and hope always finds a way to go there. Meanwhile, even now, if you go to Ukraine, you know, we have complicated situation in terms of electricity supplies and heating because of Russian drone attacks, because of Russian attacks against infrastructure. But then again, you know, there's a very popular call among the Ukrainian public to support the government's effort to save electricity and stabilize electricity grid. It's a very popular thing, and it's fancy now to turn your refrigerator off, for instance, and to avoid using you know, your TV during certain hours when the consumption is peak. So, like I said, life and hope, it always finds a way. You know what? During air alert sounds, you know what our KI journalists do at their office? They go downstairs where we have a bar in the basement. So it's basically a shelter and a bar in two. So Yeah. You know, last Friday I was leaving the office. We have an office in Podil, in like a most touristic district of Kyiv, and it was after dark. And right now we save electricity, even if we do not have planned blackouts, but still the electricity consumption in the streets are reduced. So you can see street lights, and all businesses are recommended to avoid, you know, using street lights and stuff. But I was I was amazed at how we still have a usual Friday night in Podil, with all the nightlife buzzing, with street musicians, with bars working, with people hanging out and dancing around and singing songs, but in almost absolute dark. So I have videos on Twitter if you're interested, just check it. This was super fun. So, like I said, you know, the hope, and it always finds a way. And speaking of this moral choice, also Western leaders also had to make a choice. There was this battle between, you know, two approaches of, you know, trying to save Putin's face and letting Ukraine put up the fight and, you know, keep going on supporting Ukraine. And when we have come this way from, you know, finding a compromise with Russia for the sake of saving lives to this firm support that we have now. You know, in the first months of war, Ukrainian audience in general was super critical of Western leaders, especially when it comes to German leaders and French leaders. But right now, as they started doing things, what we have seen in terms of defense aid, financial supplies, in general, the statements that they make about the future of Ukraine and the course of this war. Right now, they say that, you know, Ukrainian victory is the only possible outcome for this war. It's not fancy anymore to criticize Western leaders. So in this regard, we are very fine about this. And over these months, let's recall the early weeks before the war and the early days of the war. We have made the way from the West providing Ukraine with basic weapons for guerrilla warfare, with laws and javelins. Then we came to radars. Then we came to artillery systems in large numbers. Now we are talking about air defense, and so we made several stages of that towards the full understanding that Ukraine needs to win this war. And unfortunately, I think we have made a sort of a threshold in June, following the visit of French and German leaders to Kyiv, and I think that was the threshold, beyond which the West decided that we made a choice between trying to find a compromise, a deal with Putin, and letting Ukraine win in this regard. Unfortunately, more than 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers had to sacrifice their lives so that the West could be persuaded into, you know, helping Ukraine and seeing that, you know, helping Ukraine is worthwhile. It's a right cause. It works. So 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers had to die so they could see this. And yes, we have more than enough confidence in the West, even though we believe that we need even more than that. But still, yeah, we're moving down that road. And again, that's about decisions. That's about, you know, the moral choice between the two options. But still, we keep hearing in media and also in politics, we keep hearing these voices saying things like, why should we care about Ukraine? You know, we live in this beautiful city in Europe. Ukraine is very, very far away. Why should we care? Why no negotiations with Putin? Why no compromise for the sake of, you know, peace, for the sake of saving lives? You know, we do not want to, you know, freeze to death in winter. We do not want to die in nuclear fire, as Putin says. So why should we care? And again, such rhetorics, it refers us to go in the easiest way, which is always the worst, as far as I understand. It suggests that we, in this regard, you close your eyes on Ukraine in exchange for something that seems to be like getting rid of a problem for a while. Feeding the dictator's appetites, it only, understandably, it only encourages him to do something more in a very short run. And not only him, it shows that distortion works, nuclear blackmailing works to all dictators in the world, and the next stage will come very soon, because it will simply show them that such things work. Like I said in the beginning, deals with the devil, they never go out well in normal life, in usual life of people, but also in politics, in economy, in war, and in peace. What happens if Putin gets what he wants in Ukraine? He will get enormous resources of Ukraine, and he will get basically the control over much of food production in the world, such as the just invitation for even more pressure upon neighboring nations and even more encouragement for continuing what he's doing. Next will be a new round of food blackmailing. And because we're not dealing with reasonable leaders acting in good faith, it's not that we have misunderstanding. One of the questions that I was sent regarding this lecture was the West naive about Russia, about the Kremlin? The problem is that there always been a difference between Western leaders and the Kremlin, because Western leaders being leaders, managers of peaceful times, because we see West Europe enjoying peace for many decades, luckily. So we see Western leaders, managers, politicians selected by you facing not leaders, political leaders on the other side, but mafia. And this mafia just stops where it stopped. They are not rational, reasonable leaders acting in behalf of their nations and representing them. What they do with this nuclear blackmailing, with all these threats, they are just trying to discourage the West from helping us, because basically we have mafia that has failed and it's trying to save its face. It's trying to save the day by removing this thing that precipitated this failure in Ukraine, one of the main factors. So we do not, and we talk about compromises and stuff. We do not have a choice between war and peace. We have a choice between a shameful deal with the devil that only will make things worse, and helping Ukraine stop this now. And the thing is that what Russia is doing with the drones attacks, with these massive bombing campaigns against thermal stations, against electricity grid, they're trying to provoke yet another wave of refugees that's coming west, of course. And again, we're facing another choice in this regard. You can say that Europe is tired of Ukrainian refugees, that we have accepted millions of them, or you can do the following thing. You can provide Ukraine with air defense so that Ukrainians stay at home, more Ukrainians stay at home, and our military have a chance of defending our cities and our life-saving infrastructure. So there's always a chance between going the easiest way and giving up and going the wise way, even though it could be not super popular, but still. In these events, politicians, managers, have to make historic decisions for historic times. So hopefully we're still on the same track and we're moving there. And Netherlands, speaking of Netherlands, we remember, we know, it's always a big news that Netherlands has provided us with Panzer howitzers. And right now, the Netherlands are providing us with missiles for air defense and giving us a lot of money. We know it. We remember it. We are super thankful for this, and we really appreciate this. So I really hope that we keep on moving this road. Helping Ukraine works, because otherwise, in the opposite events, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be in Bucha with my hands tied back behind my back in a mass grave. So when it comes to choices, we all made our choices. Europe did, Ukraine did, but also at some point, I think Russians will have to make this moral choice, this complicated moral choice. Again, getting back to the list of questions that organizers were really interested, they asked me if I believe that reconciliation between Russian people and Ukrainian people was possible in the future. I think the answer stays behind also this choice. If Russian people want to make this good choice following the war, after the war, it's a choice between, falling into revanchism, falling into saying I was just fulfilling orders, finding excuses, accusing the whole world of this failure, finding the ones to blame. And there's the option of, reassessing their life, their country, their history, what they have done, their presence in the political system of the world, and changing the country. I think if they go in the good faith, and if they go the hard way, if they do not repeat the mistakes of the past, I think at some point in the future when emotions die down, a sort of a peaceful coexistence is more than acceptable and more than expected. So let there be hope and good faith in what we all do in this regard. Thank you.
Let there be hope and pictures, yeah?
And water.
And water, yeah. Thank you so much for your personal story, your great insights into this horrific war. I realized whilst you were talking that I wanted to ask you maybe too many questions on a lot of different topics.
I'm here all night.
Yeah, but I'm sure that a lot of people in the audience have very pressing questions for you as well. So I try to stick to like 15 minutes before we give the floor to all of you. Actually, I wanted to start with a more personal question from my side, because I've been telling you also that I've been to Ukraine several times in this war. And what is really striking to me is that in all those weeks, months, I never came across one single Ukrainian, even in the very early weeks into the war when everything was still very unsecure. People were still very much worried where this would lead to. I never came across, Russians were still near Kyiv, never came across one single person who would openly tell me that he or she had any doubt about victory in this war, because it would be on Ukrainian side. And I was always wondering how people can be so convinced, if this is a matter of hope, as you are saying, if it's a question of morale, as you've been saying, or is it because they have no other option to answer to a foreign journalist?
I think that was several days before the big invasion that I had an interview with a bulletin for nuclear scientists, the famous Doomsday Clock magazine. And they asked me pretty much the same question. And I think the answer that they liked was that Ukrainians tend to be having a thing that can be called a healthy negligence towards what's happening. Like a sort of a devil-may-care attitude towards basically anything. And the more Armageddonic this thing, the less anxious we are. I mean, I remember many people abroad just freaking out about videos of Ukrainians visiting shopping malls across Ukraine a couple of days before the invasion, and they were freaking out, asking how is this happening? And so by the time it was almost obvious that the invasion is going to happen, but other people were responded to that, saying that these people might be having the last weekend of peaceful life, so just let them enjoy the life. So it's a sort of very healthy negligence and devil-may-care attitude that is very useful in times like this, I would say, because in many ways, thanks to this, we have a trust towards armed forces. Like right now, I think we had a poll saying that 97% of Ukrainians trust the armed forces and 82% of Ukrainians believe Ukraine will get a full victory. It's just, and when you have many people around you, yeah, many people are nervous, many people are anxious, but still, the environment also leads you into this confidence. You feel more confident about this. So yeah, it's just collective co-trust and co-support, maybe.
But have you ever come across somebody who has expressed more doubts about this upcoming victory?
It's more about not necessarily strategic things like ending the war, but more about the current thing that's happening. Many people are concerned about and frightened about the perspective of winter because of drone attacks, because they come out of nowhere and you do not know what to expect. So it's mostly about the current thing rather than thinking about the future. So yeah.
Yeah, one thing that also I want to ask, you were born in Donbass, very close to Russia. I understand you still speak Russian as a mother tongue.
Yes, Russian.
But you were born 1991?
1992.
1992, so when Ukraine was already independent. Yeah. And I was wondering, growing up in this eastern part of the country, have you ever felt somehow connection to Russia?
Yes, it's a normal thing to feel as you grow up in this environment in Donbass. In many ways, Donbass is the most brightful thing in this regard. So yeah, you grow up in the environment that is used to be you in Moscow and Russia as the center of the universe. It's the same Soviet mindset in which Kremlin, the Earth starts from the Kremlin. Same goes for the Russian politics as well. You tend to be thinking more highly about your Russian president and Russian government rather than Ukrainian government, and obviously language was part of that, but not the crucial thing, because what the borderline between people supporting Russia and supporting Ukraine in Donbass, in our own communities, it's not about language, it's about values. It's always about values. That's why, in many ways, the borderline goes across generations as well, because we were educated in the new way. We have seen a new life, a new lifestyle. We grew up with Western habits, on Western culture. The youth is very westernized. So we basically watch the same movies. We have the same lifestyle, and we also have the same westernized views towards life, towards what is life, what is career, what should be happening in political life. If it's acceptable that lawmakers steal money, and we do nothing about this. So we're just different in terms of values. So it was mostly about the legacy of Soviet Union and mindsets rather than languages, because in the war zone in Donbass you can easily find the absolutely Russian-speaking soldier fighting with till the last drop of blood for Ukraine, and you can find in Kyiv a corrupt official speaking Ukrainian. So to me it's about values, and besides the territorial closeness to Russia is not essential, but the fact that Russia has spent many years propagating itself as the sign of stability, as the sign of prosperity, oil money. It has suggested itself as an alternative to corrupt, unstable Ukraine that also speaks another language, that also have not authoritative leaders that's doing something that is not consistent with our views of the past, and they were exploiting these problems that Donbass had in terms of crime, organized crime, unemployment, the deindustrialization of Soviet industries, because of which many people would lose jobs, economic troubles as well. So they were suggesting themselves as the better alternative. Mm-hmm. And here we are with the year 2014.
So when was the time you started realizing that this narrative was?
It's mostly with the education, university education, because you get out of the very local mindset. Besides, Donbass is very localized in terms of its mindset. You know, Donetsk is basically the center of the universe for you as you grow up in there. It's also the best hope that you can get, the highest sky that you can get is get enrolled in Donbass, in Donetsk University, and then probably getting a job in Donetsk. Not many people thinking about a career in Kyiv or in Europe.
It's too far away.
Yeah, it's just another universe. It's one of the localized mindset that many people have in the world. But in my home region, it was very, very popular. And the very fact that, for instance, I made a career in Kyiv, I moved to Kyiv 6 years ago, was because of the war, because we basically lost Donetsk. So we have to explore other opportunities, especially when it comes to young people who want to have career, want to have good police service, who want to see the streets clean, who do not want corrupt politicians, who do not want to accept this, because under semi-Russian mindset, it's acceptable that people in power steal money. So they're supposed to be doing this. This is what has happened for decades. This is part of the normal thing. We were not agreeing with this because we were reading books by Machiavelli. We were reading about NATO, the European Union, human rights, and other stupid things. So it's just this is why, in many ways, I and many other my fellows from my university, in late November 2013, when there was the beginning of Euromaidan, there was just 20 of us and a couple of lecturers from university. We just painted our pieces of paper, posters, and we just went up in Mariupol, in downtown Mariupol, to say that we want to be part of the European Union. We do not want to be part of corrupt Russia. Simple as that, just because we're different.
You told in your lecture about the state of corruption and the lies that Russia's been telling itself over and over again about the state of the army. Mm-hmm. You mentioned as well the difference between the chain of command, the structure of the army. Can you go maybe a little deeper into that? Is this difference in this command structure, is it also part of a cultural difference between Russia and Ukraine? How would you describe this?
It's mostly, the transition between old Soviet way of thinking in the military and old Soviet model is not complete in the Ukrainian military, but we are pretty far away from that towards more modern and more wise and rational NATO principles in this regard.
But was this something that was a plan, or did it come?
Yes, that was a plan. Right from the beginning, in 2014, we found our military in destitute situation. We had probably 5,000 ready-to-go troops, and that we had to reassemble the military right from the start, and we understood that we did not stand a chance against the big Soviet military. We even have this very popular saying that a small Soviet military will never defeat a large Soviet military. So we have to improvise. We have to go into into efficacy of what we could do. One of those things was that we were suggesting, we implementing in the military, was to let it be more effective rather than quantitative, which is letting your commanders, sergeants on the ground, for instance, or lieutenants that command smaller groups of people, they tend to know the situation better on the ground. So you just can give them authority to decide what to do, and you're supposed to just tell them what their mission is.
And do you think this difference is it decisive?
Yes,
or
and
is
they
it
decide, and they decide how to get this mission done. Meanwhile, in Russia, you have to go all the structure of commands up to a very certain level in which decision must be made. And this decision chain must be go down again to you, which takes a lot of time, and it's not a flexible system. It's very neglectful towards the actual situation. It's a system that was possible in World War II, probably, but not possible in the time when you basically have, in Ukraine we have laptops with the software that gives you full situational awareness just on your tablets, so you know all the units within your operational region. So you have to give more authority, give more control to people on the ground because they know better. So that was the basically very essential part of the NATO reform, as we call it, to get in line of what NATO is in this regard. So essentially, in many ways, what we're seeing right now on the map, and the map does not show the full of Ukraine conquered. In many ways, this was the difference between the two approaches. Mm-hmm. In many ways, it gave our military a lot of success in this regard.
Yeah, of course. We've seen that over the past months, of course. And this is probably the most
impressive,
difficult question, to answer. I don't know if there's any sensible answer, but at least I can ask. Is there any prediction you can make of what is going to happen over the next few months?
War is not a very good time for predictions because
But nobody would have predicted what has happened. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this war is especially difficult because it's very changeable, it's very volatile, and it gives us surprises quite often. And if you thought you're surprised, just wait. And another thing is that the fog of war, especially on the Ukrainian side, is so thick, it's very hard to really see what's going on behind there. We have our own tools of understanding the general situation because Russians talk a lot, and we also have friends, but when it comes to things like understanding our offensive capability at this time and in this area, it's a very complicated thing, so it's very hard to make predictions. But given the pace of what we have seen over the last, let's say, few months, and given the tendencies that we see, I think right now the Ukrainian military is doing autumn campaign aimed at bringing us to the best place we can by wintertime. For instance, taking Kherson. Then wintertime comes and there will be another phase.
So you think this will happen before winter comes?
Not only me, but many other people. So it does not necessarily include Kherson, but getting the best position we can by wintertime. And during wintertime, there will be something different. There will be a war of logistics, of this challenge to maintain the military system in the best condition possible, because it's an additional challenge upon logistics between two sides. And by springtime comes. Also, the civilian rear survives in harsh winter, and springtime campaign would be, I think, crucial, very crucial. And by summertime, maybe we will have something that can be perceived as the grounds for negotiation and for a deal and for something that we can perceive as the Ukrainian victory, probably. So maybe we will come to something by summertime, I think. But that such plan is realistically optimistic if we continue having the most broad Western support we can.
Yeah, this is what was also on my list of questions, because you mentioned this also in your lecture, and you were quite polite, I would say, about EU and NATO support to your country. We tend, as EU and NATO members, we tend to be quite satisfied with ourselves in the way we are helping Ukraine. But of course, I know also many Ukrainians who are a little bit less polite and saying that is actually that a lot more is needed, more heavier weapons, much more faster. This also, the same is for the amount of money that's being given. So I was wondering how dependent you think is your army and is Ukraine?
Very dependent. Unfortunately, very dependent, and not only the military, but also economic system as well. It's very dependent. But on the bright side, it's very effective at, basically spending your money and using your weapons. It's very effective. One would not normally expect an operator being able to master a howitzer within 3 weeks instead of 3 months. But this is what happened. And we have already mentioned this logistics gap, as we call it, between old Soviet systems and Western system artillery pieces. It took us so little to switch between basically two systems, two mindsets, two epochs. And just because they have no other choice but to be effective and good. So they do this. Right now, I'm afraid, yes, that artillery, air defense, in many ways dependent on the Western aid. Yeah.
But if you are a little bit less polite about what's being given on you and a bit less grateful, maybe, what would the immediate need be right now?
Artillery, as many pieces as possible, not necessarily super modern pieces like M777, but also older pieces, but they're still good. Air defense is super essential. Radars, winter clothes, all those things that can help Ukraine survive a protracted war of attrition. The key to this victory is, denying Russia of its ability to go on waging this war, be it defense or offense. And this needs to be done before Russia manages to play into its privilege of having almost unending stocks of Soviet weaponry. But it's been slow at acquiring and generating this military power. So we have to be quicker than this, faster than this, and this is the key to victory. And that's why we're asking the Western leaders to step up and accelerate supplies. Because why these things like Kharkiv offensive or Kherson offensive became possible? Because Ukrainian military managed to accumulate the offensive capability to make use of it. Right now, this is not happening, and no fresh advances because we are still in the process of accumulating. And the Russians are also, not walking around from this. They also accumulating defensive capabilities in this regard. So it's a question of whoever is faster in this. Yeah.
And your area of expertise is, of course, your defense reporter. When did you actually start realizing that the state of the Russian army was as bad as you mentioned in your lecture?
When I saw destitute Russian prisoners of war being dressed worse than many homeless people in my neighborhood. I'm
and
quite serious
when was that?
It was early days of March, I guess.
So very soon, actually, into the war.
Yes, very soon, because, and again, like so many people in the West, we were programmed into thinking, into believing what Russians were saying about themselves and their propaganda, because we have seen headlines about how deadly Russia is, how modern it is, how they spent $1 trillion on modernizing its military, that they have boasted of this supersonic, hypersonic missiles. They have boasted about fresh modifications of main battle tanks, about Armata tank, but in reality, what we have seen was really old BMP-1s, rusty, with barely trained soldiers, many of them conscripts, many of them being hungry and begging for money or for drinking water, almost not dressed in this regard. So that was quite a shock for us. All this, wooden tools in Russian tanks. So yeah, to me, that was a huge surprise to see that in many regards, especially when it comes to maintenance, when it comes to uniforms, personal defenses, Ukrainian military ended up being in a better position, way better position, because we were thinking very high of the Russian military, and we were preparing for a great challenge of being at least closely as good as what we are seeing in NATO militaries. Meanwhile, Russians are not doing this. We were lying to themselves. They lie goes after lie, and instead of effective body armor, the Russian generals got the new dachas on the Black Sea. So they ended up being in where they are now, and they ended up trying to buy more time by recruiting, mobilizing lots of people that will simply die for the sake of buying them time.
Right. I have two more questions more about being a journalist before we go to the audience. What I hear a lot in Ukraine is also people telling us one of the worst things that can happen to us if our stories are no longer being told, if TV crews are no longer coming in. Is there any sign that has reached you that this so-called Ukraine fatigue has already started?
This is one of the things that we fear a lot, because we depend a lot on public opinion in Western nations, because being democracies, these nations put pressure upon their leaders so that they render assistance to Ukraine. But when it comes to fatigue, a couple of weeks ago, I launched a crowdfunding campaign on Twitter. I simply got a PayPal account, and I wanted to fundraise for Ukrainian soldiers in need, for disabled veterans, so we could pay for their rehabilitation, prosthetics, many other things. I did expect maybe $2,000–3,000 fundraised within weeks or so, but within 5 days, 6 days, I guess, I fundraised $130,000 within several days. And many people were sending money, $100, $200, $500, $1,000, $2,000 from Germany, from Netherlands, from England, from the US. Lots of people were saying good things about the Ukrainian soldiers. And I started this campaign for Azovstal soldiers because there are lots of amputations with those soldiers. So I was absolutely shocked by the readiness of people to give their money to a Ukrainian journalist they saw on Twitter, so he could provide treatment to Ukrainian soldiers from a country an ocean away. I wish I could. I think we need to have a story in which I bring the most interesting comments about the Ukrainian soldiers. So
this is for your book that you're going to write. Yeah,
maybe. But I told one of the combat formations asked me to help with the fundraising for cars, and I suggested that I simply put some sort of announcement on Twitter, and you'll be surprised by the fact how many people are ready to actually support this, because many things have absolutely iconic status in the West. I was absolutely shocked about this. And I just showed them some of the messages that I got on PayPal, because you can write a comment on your donation. And they were absolutely stunned by this. We never expected that. And it's a very unique situation in which after 8 months of war.
So you're saying there's no Ukraine fatigue yet?
I'm not seeing that, and people are throwing money at me, so I could help Ukrainian soldiers.
Yeah, we'll do some crowdfunding for Kyiv Independent later on as well.
Yeah, I expected to be in this place where I complain about Ukraine fatigue, but people send me money for Ukrainian soldiers.
Yeah, I mentioned in the beginning, and it's not a joke, that you have over 1 million followers on Twitter. And as one of the organizers of tonight mentioned, told me that's over 100,000 more than Dmitry Medvedev has. So good job. And I was wondering, you were saying you also launched these crowdfunding campaigns on Twitter. In what way are you feeling that you as a journalist yourself are influencing the narrative about this war?
Speaking of Dmitry Medvedev, given the latest events, I think he's trying so hard to get back into attention span.
He wants to overrule you in the Twitter followers.
Good luck.
This is the goal.
Dimon, good luck. Have a good luck in this. But I'm really not a big fan of talking about things like how many followers I have.
No. I'm just saying.
But speaking of influence, because I never expected this, I do not feel that I earned this or deserve this. I just ended up being a guy in a historic event in the middle of the war. I was simply telling things as I was feeling them, as I was seeing them. So, yeah, in the age of disinformation, in the age of of the fact that you can call black white and not to be responsible for this. I think it works well that you stay simple, stay honest in front of your audience, and you simply tell a simple truth, because in Ukraine, as a Ukrainian journalist, you don't have to lie. You have nothing to be shameful about. You don't have to lie anything about anything, and you simply, tell the story of what's happening right in front of your eyes. And I think by doing that, I won a lot of hearts for Ukraine, for my nation, for the things that we stand for the community that we stand for. I think simple honesty, it attracts people, and people just come to you for information.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's about 1 million questions that are still probably I would like to ask, but I would now like to invite you to ask them. There is 2 people walking around with microphones, one on this floor, one on the balcony. So if you want to put a question, please raise your hand. I want to ask you to start speaking only when the microphone is there, and I will be quite strict and not necessarily fair when it comes to people starting to give their opinions and not putting questions, because I think that would be real pity, because there's so many of you. I can't really see where. Can you come to the front maybe, or wherever you want to start? The choice is yours. Mine.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for your talk. What about Belarus? What do people in your circle and yourself think about Belarus and Belarusians, and how's it changed since the war, since February?
Yeah, many
That's
people.
a perfect example of a good question. Yeah, please. Yeah, good job. Thank you so much for this question.
And
yes.
it's complicated.
Huh?
It's
complicated. Okay, you have the.
No, it's really simple.
It's really simple.
People tend to be very concerned about this new threat again from the invasion, possibly from the with the involvement in Belarusian military. Many people ask me, not only me, do I think it's going to happen? My answer to that is that it's possible, but not likely, because the Belarusian military are absolutely not ready for this. Such a mission would be a suicide for them, given their situation and the fact that they basically seized weapons for Russia and many other factors. And besides, a little story here. I think that happened on February 25th or 26th, the first couple of days into the big invasion, and I got a call from a source that was very high profile, and he told me that I have to write a story about Belarus, and they got information that at 5 a.m. in the morning on the next day, that was in the evening, so in several hours at 5 a.m., the first aircraft of Belarusian military will take off, bound for Ukraine, carrying Belarusian paratroopers. So Belarusian army was just about to enter this war. So they asked me that I had a story about this, referring to sources. And that was an absolutely trustful source. So this is 99% that this was to happen, but it never happened. It never happened. I thought that my source was deceived me or something, or giving me false information or something like that. But from another source that was also trustful, we learned that there was an order to step in for the Belarusian military, but in the final hours, they decided not to go. So they refused from that. At that point, a couple of days into the invasion, when Ukraine was in dire straits and the Russian military was just about to enter Kyiv. Right now, as we have seen what we have seen, I don't think that's a good idea for them to go in. And if even they decide to do so, that's going to be a suicide for them.
Next question. Yeah. Where is the mic? Yeah.
Thank you for your lecture. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the hard choice that Russians face? Because I think I would like to have hope on that side as well. But do you think it's realistic that soldiers come back from fighting a war in Ukraine, facing contempt from Ukraine and the entire world, and then come back and rise up against Putin. I think it will be more natural for the Russian people to blame the West and blame their loss on the West and not rise up against Putin.
Yeah, this is something that we all talk about, and especially when we draw historic parallels between what might be expected for Russia and what had happened to Germany following World War I, Weimar Republic, and lots of dissatisfied veterans coming back home with the feeling of being stabbed in the back and stuff like that. I think the positive outcome for this comes if new Russian elites, new Russian leadership manages to go the right way in terms of reconstructing the whole life in Russia, getting Russia back into the binding system of nations, and also explaining this whole thing for the Russian people, so they could prevent popular opinion from swinging into revanchism and this stuff. So as Germans were instructed, and they will let know that something really terrible happened, and it's not a world conspiracy. It's not that the West should be blamed. It's something that you did, and you have to overcome this. So in many ways, it's about Russians and Russian in itself. So they have to do this, not us.
And how hopeful are you?
But we have seen a precedent of successful overcoming the demons of the past, so maybe. And we're interested in this too, because Russia is not going anywhere. Many people do hope that Russia will break apart into many nations, but still, Russia is not going anywhere. We're doomed to be living next to it, and we are interested in stable and predictable Russia rather than this.
Thank you. Maybe a little bit more to the front of the venue, or... Oh, you're here. Yeah, sorry.
Is there someone on the balcony? Yes.
Oh, I can see.
We go to the balcony first. I also can't see.
Yeah, here. Behind you.
Okay.
It's just because of the light.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Well,
thanks, Illia. Simple question: how about Transnistria? It's very close to Odessa.
It's very close to Odessa, but what Russians had in there was absolutely of no meaning, of no effect. We spent a lot of time thinking about this, but not a meaningful factor about this. So we're fine. Odessa is fine as long as Nikolaev is fine and the sea is clear.
Yeah?
Thank you for your great lecture. I was wondering, maybe you can give in high over, what does Ukraine expect if in the future there's peace, of a permanent peace agreement with Russia? Mm-hmm. And will this make a difference if you negotiate with the regime like now, the current regime in Russia, or say for some miracle happens that in Russia there will be a Navalny government? Mm-hmm. Would that be a difference to negotiate a peace agreement? Thank you.
Again, a very hard thing to predict, but referring to history, I think the most realistic and sad way for us to end this war is to deny Russian ability to go on. It does not mean all Russian soldiers must be killed, or that Ukrainian military should enter Moscow. It's about lack of ability to go on. This can be achieved, but at the same time, such a disaster, political disaster, military disaster, would trigger something large inside Moscow. So there will be probably a period of turmoil inside Russia, and hopefully this turmoil will lead to a more sane government in Moscow, because Ukraine has publicly said we will never have any sort of negotiation with Vladimir Putin. Hopefully this new government, will be capable of having a sort of a deal with Ukraine, because they can't go on with the war for many reasons. And hopefully we will get an agreement, at least a ceasefire, and then we'll see what about the peace treaty. Right now, this most essential thing is to deny them of their ability to go on killing people and advancing, and to stabilize the situation, and it is. So we'll see what happens next.
Thank you. This question here, yeah.
We saw a lot of bombing of the electricity infrastructure. I was wondering, how do you have any insight how bad it is and when it will be back up? And
well, it's never out for 100% of the time. The latest figures say that between 30 and 40% of Ukrainian electricity grid have been damaged or destroyed. It puts a lot of pressure on the remaining parts, so that's why the Ukrainian government have a planned scheduled blackout campaigns throughout the country so they could stabilize the rest of the grid. And besides, we have mentioned this campaign of reducing the consumption of electricity power in this regard. So essentially, it's a battle between Russian missiles and drones and Ukrainian workers trying to repair the damage and get the electricity back all the time. It happens all the time. So yeah, it's never out. For instance, in Kyiv we have city services having like a sort of a schedule, a weekly schedule. We had it last week, under which a certain districts would be switched off electricity for up to 4 hours. Not necessarily. They can be switched, but if things are okay, they will not be switched. So you will have electricity in your home. But sometimes, Ukrainians be Ukrainians, and the electricity gets switched off out of a sudden. So it's always a battle between missiles and Ukrainian workers trying to get electricity back. It's never out for 100%, at least not now. Hopefully that was... Speaking of air defense, air defense came, IRIS-T came, and we had a week of blackouts, but starting from this week, we do not have it anymore. Not for this week.
Maybe a little bit over here. I see a lot of people still anxious. We still have some time.
Almost 10.
Thanks, Illia. I also have a question about electricity, because I read that the Ukrainian electricity network was now coupled to the European network and decoupled from the Russian network.
Yeah.
Can we expect some backup electricity from Europe?
Hopefully. I'm not an expert in this regard, but I know it for sure that I think it happened on the invasion's day one, that all connections with Belarus and also Russia have been cut off. And right now we are connected to the European grid, but we not exporting the electricity in Europe for the sake of domestic use.
Okay.
I think.
No, it's more. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I always have to give back the microphone really quickly. Yeah, the lady in green is already for a long time.
Illia, thank you for being here. I have a question. There are a lot of war crimes being committed in Ukraine right now by the Russian army. What do you think the odds are that if there is a negotiation with Russia, that some of the responsible people, like Putin and his cronies, will end up in The Hague?
To be honest, I don't think that's likely. We, and not only we, many people in the world will be working for that. Of course, many of my colleagues in Russia are also working, and then they plead to be working on that in the future, in the years to come. But I don't think that's going to happen. Another question is that we have mentioned the sort of reconstruction of Russia, post-war reconstruction of Russia. It's a big question if hopefully the new government decides to prosecute war criminals inside Russia by Russian governments. It's a very big question. Of choice between trying to persecute and not trying to persecute war criminals, or they decide to have a sort of amnesty to keep the situation under control. Let them decide what would be the worst option. The least bad option.
Can't really see how many questions there are on the balcony, but maybe we go.
You with the curly hair.
Yes.
Here.
Yeah, we have someone. We have many people.
There's one up there. I would just walk.
Slava Ukraini, first of all. My question is, do you think this war could have been prevented?
This war could have been prevented 20 years before, 22 years. Yeah, 22 years before it started, but not necessarily about the name. I'm not referring to Vladimir Putin as a person, but I'm referring to Russia being a normal democratic country in which government and leaders are responsible to public opinion, which is engaged in presenting itself to the world, creating something useful for the world, rather than simply exporting oil and collecting money and preparing an invasion armies and for the satisfaction of unchangeable governments for their imperial ambitions. So if Russia could have a responsible leadership that is changeable with elections, truly changeable, so we would probably not face what we have now.
Yeah, question. So when the war started, Russia just basically marched in from Crimea to Kherson. What is your theory on how that happened so easily?
I guess we're not allowed to use F words.
What?
F words, no?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
You know what I want to say. It's just what happened in the South was a combination of failures. The F word was failure. Yeah. The combination of systemic failure on many regards, on the aspect of local government and also local security services, also military commands, not soldiers but commands. It was a combination of many failures that admitted Russian military too deep into Ukrainian territory, and of course Russians were not supposed to take Kherson so quickly and so easily, because the military even found itself not capable of blowing the Antonovsky Bridge to prevent them from happening. It never happens. So Kherson was taken, but with not much of a fight, unfortunately, because many things went wrong in this regard.
I think we have time for 2-3 more questions. Who is the most pressing one?
Someone on the balcony, or
we have one on the second balcony.
On the second balcony. Oh, you see.
Yes, here on top.
Okay.
Thanks for your really nice talk. Question on the cultural side. It's more like I've heard last week in a podcast that it's also a decolonization process for Russia, this whole war, similar to Holland, Indonesia, and a way of Putin is mentioning Ukraine as not as a country, but as something.
As a set of values. Yeah.
Sorry?
As a set of values, not necessarily the country.
Yeah. So it's more. It was described as a decolonization process for Russia as well. What do you think of this? Maybe. I
absolutely agree that there will not be a better chance for usual Russians and new Russian leadership into reconstructing and giving a chance to their country after this war, into this very difficult and stressful post-war period. And one of those things that must be happening is the reassessment of Russian history, demilitarization and de-imperialization of its history, because as someone who grew up in Soviet mindset and Soviet narratives on history, on wars, and on the West, on many other things, I'm horrified to know that basically they do not have history, but at least in the public understanding, they do not have history, but it's just a list of justification how great Russia is and why it should rule the world, basically, how undefeatable it is. These are how they are superior over many people. These are very dangerous ideas, and the Russian society needs to be purged out of this. And this goes with the decolonization of Russia. So as any other empire, Russia has to decolonize itself. It has to strip itself of this imperial, imperial aspect about this. So it could be a normal developing country that fits the modern world. that does not have empires anymore. We have nations of Apple on Amazon rather than nations of colonial empires. So it does not work anymore. So for the sake of their own survival as a nation, they have to decolonize themselves and to redeem themselves from this. It's for their own sake, for their own good as well.
Thanks. We do 2 more, and it's out of my hands now where the microphone is going to. So that's convenient. Yes.
Thank you for coming here and showing all your courage. I was wondering, what are you afraid of?
I'm afraid of the day that I might see all those things that has happened over the last 8 months just in vain. Lots of national effort that we have done as journalists, as people, lots of blood spilled by soldiers. My worst nightmare is seeing those things go in vain.
One more.
Yeah, we have a question up here.
Yeah. It better be a very good one. Huh?
Oh, the pressure is really
choice.
high, but...
Huh?
Okay, I was actually... Oh. Are there more, or I'm just...
Please go on.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I can go on. Sorry. I was just wondering about the possibilities of a nuclear attack, or what happens with the bombings on
to
the...
end in an optimistic way. Thank you.
On the dam, because of course there are more tensions now since the Cuban crisis ever.
So I think you will have time for this because we are starting. To put it shortly, I think that's possible, but not likely. And even if they decide to adhere to such a decision, and I think they will at some point because they will simply reduce to the only possible choice, it will not be effective. It will not change anything for them, and it would not reverse the course of the war. Why? It is very likely that they might think about using tactical nuclear weapons rather than strategic, because strategic obviously is an absolute thermonuclear war in which Russia has no chances. But when it comes to tactical nukes, also lots of problems on their way. First problem is that NATO and West and Ukraine will be able to notice long before it happens, long before they actually employ nukes in battlefield, because when it comes to tactical nukes, that's even stronger than the strategic nuclear weapons. It's a long chain of decisions and long chain of people and action that need to be done. So we will notice this. And second thing is that the political backlash behind such a thing as using nukes on the battlefield against Ukraine would be so severe that it would simply not justify the immediate effects on the ground. And besides, the West will definitely be interested in giving the strongest response to that or preventing that before it's too late. But also, China and India are absolutely not interested in such a precedent set. So they will also do many things to prevent these things. But let's pretend that we have all this chain fulfilled and they managed to do this. Tactical nuclear weapons, the nature of them, it says that they will, it would be not enough to have just one tactical nuclear explosion commit anywhere. They could do it to demonstrate and intimidate just one nuke launched against unpopulated areas for the sake of demonstration, but it will not change anything because the Ukrainian resilience is very strong, and it will not discourage Ukrainians from going on, and it will not discourage the West from going on from this regard. And besides, we go back to the backlash against this. So in order to get a sort of a effect on the battlefield, they will have to use multiple explosions, multiple instance of the use of nuclear weapons. Also a problem, apart from the international reaction. Also a problem because the doctrine of the use of tactical nuclear weapons says that, okay, the enemy has the defensive line, you have to break the defensive line, and so the tactical nukes are used to be creating gaps and holes in these defenses. So you use the nuke, and then immediately after that, in order to have the actual effect, you have to go through this very ground zero with your mechanized forces. Seeing what is the Russian military, and especially this mobilized, untrained, and unwilling Russian men, I do not think that they will be very happy to go on seeing the mushroom clouds in front of them, and even going through them. They do not have capability of that. They do not have morale for that. They are absolutely not prepared for a nuclear strike environment. I'm referring to regular military, but mobilized militaries, mobilized forces as well. So, to put it shortly, it's not likely, and if they do this, they will gain nothing, and the response will be very hard for them to tackle with.
Thank you so much. There is 4 things that I need to say before you can applaud and
not applaud
and have your drinks. First is that I really want to thank the audience for being, you've been a great audience. Keeping your questions short is really appreciated very much. Thank you for that. You can be, and this is second, even become an even more great audience because you've been looking at it's gone now. Been looking at this picture for some time, and you maybe are wondering, what is it? Well, it's an advice to all of you to donate, if you can, some money for Illia and his team at Kyiv Independent. You can go to either one of these websites and search for Kyiv Independent and donate the money there. How dependent are you on this money?
Very dependent.
Very dependent. So you know what to do.
No. The thing is that when it comes to GoFundMe, we started it immediately after we established the Kyiv Independent, following the downfall of the Kyiv Post. I think right now we have close to $2 million on GoFundMe, and when it comes to Patreon, we aim at having 10,000 patrons by the end of the year. Right now we have 8,000. And we are almost 100% dependent on popular support, on people who just pop in $5 a month for this. And thanks to the very loyal audience, thanks to many people across the world who are willing to support us, we still go on, we still work, and it's just thanks to the audience, the readers. So if you want to support us, you're more than welcome to support the truly independent wartime media outlet, because this is basically the only way for us to survive, because as the team who has been expelled from the Kyiv Post by the publisher, we decided that we do not want to be dependent on just one name with the money. So we want to respond to no one but our audience, to millions of people. So thank you.
Thank you. There's two more things. One more thing is that for those of you who want to keep on reading and being better informed about what's going on, there's a lot of books in the back that you can buy, among which one that has been published today, by Hella Rottenberg. She's here, one of the co-founders of Raam of Rusland, so please go there. And last thing we need to do is to give you an amazing applause. Illia, thank you so much for coming.
No, stop. Can I have a picture for Twitter?
More applause. Shall I take one for you?
Can I please hold it for me?
Woo! Woo!
Okay. That's enough.
Thank you.